Guys, how many Peter Pan remakes and Alice in Wonderland remakes have we gotten on the big screen? Let's see, not one, not two.
Not three, not four.
But the difference is, this one's a little unique. I'll tell you guys why. What's going on, you guys? James here with another real review, and today I'm diving right into Come Away, the newest take on Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland's story, starring David Oyelowo and Angelina Jolie. This cast is actually surprisingly really darn good in some moments, but also I think the story's unique, like I just finished saying, but I'll tell you guys why it is in just a little bit. If you haven't already, guys, go ahead, hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel, and tap on the bell so you don't miss out on any new reviews and reactions that we have coming up this week and beyond. It's about to be real busy, y'all. If you missed it, I did drop my review for The Mandalorian Season 2 Episode 2. You can find a ton of new releases floating around as this video goes on at the top of the screen. If you haven't already, like this video, guys, and get loud in the comments below. Let me know if you're checking out this movie when it hits whatever theaters are open, and eventually video on demand. Alrighty, y'all, well, let's get into Come Away. A movie, like I said, surrounds two children, Peter and Alice, and yes, it's Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland. Now, even though we have heard this story before, it's a little bit of a different take on everything. Director Brenda Chapman, who also directed Brave and The Prince of Egypt, really dove into realism with this movie. Now, the spark notes on what this movie is about is Peter and Alice are dealing with the loss of their brother, and of course their parents are still grieving over the loss of their child who was set to go off to school and be the scholar of the family. So what does Peter and Alice do? They have to now decide whether they want to live in reality or go ahead and live in their imaginations. So it's a very cool take on these very familiar stories. I mean, we got Wendy this year, a retelling of the classic Peter Pan movie surrounding Wendy. So I was curious to see how Brenda Chapman was really going to dive into this story, and for the most part, it worked. I really bought into the filmmaking aspect of this movie, honestly, and it's because Brenda Chapman likes to mix both reality and imagination in very quick moments, especially in the beginning where we find Peter and his brother and sister playing in the forest. When they're swinging around sticks, those sticks turn into swords, and when they look at a boat, it turns into a huge ship commandeered by pirates and they must fight them off. So it felt very fun, and for a moment I was taken out of my present day reality and put right into the movie. I mean, technically speaking, it looks beautiful, the score is magical, but I also have to give props to some really darn good acting in this movie. And that comes via the acting of David Oyelowo, Jordan A. Nash, who plays Peter, Keira Chansa as Alice, and a surprise cameo by Clark Peters. Yes, the Clark Peters. He plays the Mad Hatter. It was so cool to see how they, again, were mixing these stories and weaving it in between and giving us a dose of reality while also playing to my imagination. And it has to do with how mature the script is. I mean, honestly, for a PG movie, it dives into classism, the upper and the lower class systems, and even shows a funeral and death scene. So for me, I was almost taken aback thinking, wow, I definitely didn't expect this from a PG movie, but I'm glad it happened because it really, again, just grounds the story. It was also pretty cool to hear an adult Alice narrating the story to her children. It kind of brings the story around full circle. And the movie's at its best when it blends both Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland stories together without it feeling too busy. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but I did love to see when Alice would look at someone and they turn into the Queen of Hearts, or when Peter would look at someone and they would, I don't know, he'd see Captain Hook. It was really cool. I mean, it was so different, and I felt like, man, this is a movie that really is pleasantly surprising me. However, it does fall short of the mark in the middle of the movie, so that's where we're going to transition now to what didn't really work with Come Away, and that is the writing. It does feel a little long and unfortunately predictable, and for a movie that's over 2.5 hours, I was a little disappointed with how they were treating the story in the middle. It felt a little uneventful, unfortunately dry, and if I'm looking at my watch, that is the sign of a movie that is chugging along, right? So the middle for me was a little too heavy, and they could have trimmed off a lot of fat there. The film kind of just stops and really diverts all of its attention to Peter and Alice trying to help their family, and that sounds nice, but unfortunately I was finding it more fun when they were just very loose with everything in terms of mixing reality and imagination. And even though I was oozing over this cast, guys, there are some performances here that really are underwhelming, and that starts with Angelina Jolie. For as great as an actress as she is, she didn't deliver the strongest performance. It never really worked for me, and it didn't captivate my attention. It was really just passable, and then in some moments where she was pretending to be a character from Alice in Wonderland, I felt, wow, this is such a difference, and it honestly works, but then it goes away real fast, and unfortunately her performance for the most part is just kind of forgettable. And then arguably my biggest issue with this movie is the final 10 to 15 minutes. We were waiting and waiting to see when they would fully dive into Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland story, at least I was. And then eventually we get that, but it happens so quickly in that third act that it almost felt way too crammed together, and there wasn't much of a direction by Brenda Chapman there. It also felt very rushed. We were getting all of this cool imagery, and we were getting nods to Peter Pan's story, for example, but again, I'm like, man, this doesn't work for me like it did in the first act, because they were subtle hints, subtle clues, little breadcrumbs, and then they just shoved it in your face in the final act, and I'm like, no, doesn't work. So overall, you guys, Come Away really is a fun movie in the beginning and even in some moments in the end. It's the most unique retelling of Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland story. I can't say that enough, guys, that we've gotten in a little while, even though it's very familiar, and yes, it does drag in the middle. I feel like Brenda Chapman had a grasp on what really was going to work for not only kids but adults as well. I did feel captivated by some of these moments, and again, some of it was magical, and that was a pretty cool feeling. But really, guys, it's the middle of this movie that fails it. It's way too heavy with story and exposition. It just bogs the film down. But for what it's worth, this is a much better take on the typical retelling of Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland, and even though it's not executed all the way through, that has to count for something. Alrighty guys, well there you have it. That's my real review of Come Away, a movie you can catch on video on demand and in theaters wherever they're open, Friday, November 13th. So when you check it out, guys, go ahead and let me know in the comments what you thought of this movie, and tell me what you thought of my review as well. Was I being too harsh, or was I just right? And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit the big red button below, subscribe to the channel. We are so close to 3,000, and it's all because of you. Alrighty y'all, well I need to go work on a lot more content. Alrighty you guys, well hey, thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you at the next screening.